Let's roll it! So, story time. The year is 1965, and a crowd of nearly 3,000 fill the seats of an auditorium in New York City. And even though it's cramped, hot, and the audience is all sweaty, to them, it's worth it. Because it's not just any auditorium, it's Carnegie Hall, the venue for the world's greatest musicians. And it's not just any musician. They're waiting to hear the first performance in 12 years from the legendary Vladimir Horowitz, a renowned pianist. Backstage, the manager and everyone else are starting to believe it was indeed too good to be true. That there was no way he'd come and perform, as it was mere minutes before showtime. And Horowitz is nowhere to be seen. But as the crew prepare to announce the cancellation of the concert, Horowitz appears. His ancient hands are so cold, his manager tries using his own to warm the nervous musicians. And despite the thick, heavy air and the deafening whispers of a curious crowd, Horowitz isn't mentally there. His body may be, but his mind is elsewhere, violently wrestling with his own reality. A reality where he was a fraud, incapable of performing well enough to satiate an impossible crowd, and undeserving of any legend he had. As sweat soaks through his tuxedo shirt, his stomach tosses and aches from the adrenaline. He can't step onto that stage. And so he turns away now, facing his manager. But before he tries anything, his manager firmly grips him by the shoulders and swings him around before pushing him out into the light. Of course, Horowitz would go on to perform spectacularly, as he always did. But his battle with stage fright and the uncertainty of himself as a musician plagued him to the end of his life. So, in a nutshell, I can appreciate a small sense of this performance anxiety. At the beginning of film school, I met Duncan, and we shared this idea that not only did we have something to prove, we want to make our marks as up-and-coming filmmakers. So, in 2018, we set out to begin one of the most difficult and transformative chapters of our lives. The ingredients were simple. Cinematic action scenes with fight choreography, genuine character growth, immersive fantasy world building for a post-apocalyptic story, a runtime of less than 15 minutes with only a single line of dialogue. On top of all that, shooting in the coldest parts of upstate New York. In short, we were idiots. So how does one make a movie? How does one movie? Is it concentrating efforts into rehearsals and acting? Is it encouraging and promoting brilliant collaboration in the writing room? Yes, all of that, but we didn't even get that far. To illustrate the bad nature of our shooting experience, here's a streak of chaos from one day. March 3rd, 2018 was a Saturday. This meant Duncan, myself, and an unnamed associate could spend the whole day driving out to a desolate location. We wanted to convince the audience our story took place in a post-war wasteland. And to portray a frozen carcass of a planet, we found this gem nestled between state parks nearly an hour north. We wanted to ensure our vehicle didn't get stuck, as by this point, the truck so graciously lent to us from Duncan's grandpa had earned its fair share of battle scars from really stupid and completely avoidable episodes of off-roading. So we took the only option available. We walked. We hiked through snow that came up to our thighs, dragging either props or camera equipment on sleds. The ground rose and fell in gradient as we hiked through miles of late winter tundra, for we were on a mission to beat the sun. The script called for dusk, but this time of year, you were lucky to have the setting sun for an hour. And as we shook from the cold and sweat trickled from the exhaustion, we made it. Every ounce of light available was utilized to get precisely the shots we imagined. Finally, a win. The sun dips beneath the horizon, and so we know it's time we start heading home. The gear is packed and the sleds are ready. We know the way back will be long, but spirits are still high. Back to our third person, who we'll call him Paul Giamatti. Anyways, Paul's been in a super bulky costume this whole time, practically swimming in it because it's so thick. At this point, I noticed. Paul was walking a little funny. See, Paul was wearing boots that didn't quite fit him, and we've been hiking in thigh-high snow and ice. I also recall that we've been sufficiently exposed enough that frostbite was a legitimate possibility. So on a whim, I asked him, "Hey Paul, how are your feet?"
We chillin', brah.
They were soaked. I, being a responsible director, producer, functioning adult, brought extra wool socks with this very situation in mind. As I forced this other grown adult to strip out of coal-drenched socks, the gravity of the situation dawns on me. The film gear and general exhaustion of the day weighed us down. A gamble had to be made. My dear friend Paul Giamatti and I would stay with the gear and slowly inch our way to the exit. My co-director Duncan, known for his gazelle-like physique, would rush to the Ranger and bring the vehicle 2/3 of the way to the rendezvous point. So, I sent Duncan with a half-dead flashlight. Which in hindsight was spectacularly stupid, but it all works out, at least so far. Trying to read Braille in snow, Duncan felt his way to the Ranger and climbed in. He turns the key to roar the engine awake from its slumber. With confidence, Duncan positions himself towards the mouth of the road. For a moment, there's doubt, but thinking of the situation at hand, thinking of his friends in the darkness of winter, he feathers the gas. The Ranger moves forward, first at a crawling pace, and as Duncan pushes the truck faster through the snow, both Duncan and the Ranger gather confidence through the frozen pass ahead. A pass that steeply got worse, and with it, confidence faded. As the tire slipped even more, it became abundantly clear that should he slow down or attempt to turn the vehicle around, any loss of momentum would mean becoming immobilized. His only hope was in knowing the rendezvous point for where Paul Giamatti and I were waiting had actual flat land, unlike the completely uneven and unlevel terrain he was battling through. This meant the only way was fast and forward. In proper horror movie fashion, there was no signal. It's pitch black dark, freezing cold, approximately 12 hours since our last meals, and we were exhausted from hiking. We half-heartedly began advancing past the rendezvous point, with no clue to the fate of Duncan, simply hoping for the best. And then we heard movement. In the distance, a shape was approaching us from the sea of darkness. Paul and I stood still, wondering, bear, murder. My heart's pumping. I'm readying myself despite the fact that I can't even run because of the slush. Suddenly, the figure stops and narrows in on our direction and begins coming closer. The sleep deprivation, starvation, and complete fear combined to just nothing. I could do nothing as it got closer. And then, I saw it. It was Duncan. So, the Ranger is completely paralyzed on the trail. Its wheels are spinning and the frame of the truck is literally elevated by a giant slab of ice. The temperature is now in the single digits, so we had a grim decision to make. With the truck frozen in place, we had two options. We stay up all night hacking away at ice, working in shifts. The Ranger was stuck, but we had a shovel and the engine still fired up, allowing the heater to warm us. Or, on the other hand, crawl our way out from the trail, leaving the truck behind. Pray that we can find a ride back to civilization at whatever hour we emerge from, and then hope we can free the truck another day. Did you know we were stubborn? The answer was C, a little bit of both. For several hours, we took turns. One person hacked away at the ice outside, thinking it was making a difference, while the other two tried to regain feeling in their extremities inside the Ranger. But eventually, our bodies began to fail at the limits of human exhaustion. It was 2 a.m., pitch black darkness, 0 degrees, no food, no reception, and we were all falling asleep. I had one Hail Mary left. Somehow, my phone managed to give me 1 bar of service as I paced around the truck. With the last of my battery, I reached another crew member of this film. Recognizing my tone and the late hour, they agreed to come to our rescue. Now knowing that there was a way home, the 3 of us gathered what remained of our strength. Abandoning the Ranger, we hiked the rest of the way to the nearest road. This was only one of many deranged days shooting this sophomore short film. While I can elaborate on the fate of the Ranger and how I weathered not 1, but 2 concussions from this project, all those lovely stories and more are for another time, because now let's talk about Anyways, what were we working with? Brutal exhaustion from a production with endless setbacks, chunks of a movie with no clear plan of how it all comes together, absolutely no usable sound, and finally a mere 48 hours to present this in front of our professors and the entire class. Somehow, the premiere actually went okay. I can tell you that our professors gave us praise and we got a good grade, but hopefully by now something is evidently clear. Incognita wasn't made by blood, sweat, and sophomore tears for the sake of a letter grade. We wanted something that would last beyond graduation, something we could showcase to prove to others, look at this. This is a real film. So after sophomore year, we go back to the cut, filing it down and polishing it, and while it's better, life happened. And although we never gave up on it, it was left in the vault every artist has of things we'll get to. Well, a year and a half later, in the year 2020, the whole world stopped. Some chose knitting, some mastered sourdough, but we, the cool kids, decided to resurrect dead student projects. Duncan decided it was time to take another look at the film, now starting from scratch. This meant re-examining the raw footage, starting a new editing timeline, and completely overhauling the audio. For the first time since this project's origin, a cut now exists with a complete beginning, middle, and end. And yet, we weren't entirely sold. Again. The second time, the movie is pushed onto the back burner as our career expands, with other narrative works completed and polished, commercial projects taken on. We began scrutinizing every detail of this amateur project we had shot years ago. We were beginning to realize so much had lapsed since the first edit of Incognita was made, and we had learned so much more in the post-production process since then, that it was no longer a reflection of everything we were able to do, and so the editing began anew. Again. Just like before, to implement all of our newly acquired skill sets, we had to start from scratch. Finally, with this version, we were generally content, at least for a moment. But by this point in time, it had been nearly 4 years since the story's inception. And oddly, despite how long this project had dragged on, we were subconsciously ready to edit it all over. Because at this point, we were obsessed with perfection. We had found ourselves in this infinite loop, constantly re-editing Incognita, and we began to realize we were doing this because we were afraid. Afraid the astronomical cost of production had been wasted. Afraid the physical effort we put in, which scaled higher than anything we've ever done in our lives, amounted to nothing. Most of all, despite the years spent, we were afraid that nobody would give a damn. That before an audience, our short was clearly the work of amateurs. Overly ambitious novices trying to create artistry where none existed. Even though we wouldn't be standing in front of an audience, this movie Duncan and I created together, every frame of this film was a little bit of us. Like new parents afraid of setting their kid on their first day of school, we found ourselves afraid to push forward due to our lack of self-certainty. So let's rewind a bit. As a filmmaker, I said I related to Vladimir Horowitz, the renowned musician notorious for his own struggles with stage fright. How did this happen? By believing every imperfection made, even in the privacy of your own thoughts, is the reason to not trust in yourself. The misguided ideas of needing more time, money, whatever finite resource you lack, is a valid excuse to not release what you've begun. It is only when what you've started is perfect in every conceivable way, that's when you show it to the world. Hence, when you fill your mind with these foolish assumptions, you too can end up like us, like Horowitz, waiting indefinitely to step out onto the stage. Incognita is an imperfect film, but Duncan and I will always be proud of it. Of the 16 festivals it was submitted to, it was accepted into only one. But just being accepted into that one means something. It means it was experienced by an audience. This time capsule of our first mistakes, our first victories, was finally published, and we had concluded our beginning steps as filmmakers. What matters is that it was completed. It is completed. Now that Incognita has vacated my Get To It vault, I wondered, what else was in it? You've been watching it. In doing the research for this video, we had to go back into our archives, reliving our youth through tons of footage we collected. It was in this archival mission that I found the very first videos I shot of myself prototyping this very channel. Along with these videos, I found so much more. My parents watching my friends and I sled down a snowy hill. My dad and I laughing in a pool, and I was incredibly overcome with emotion, reliving so much of what I had forgotten. Because in these videos, my parents were young. Their hair was still a youthful black. My dog Happy was still the shy puppy he was when we first brought him home. And he was still alive. I kept telling myself that I would really spend time with him when I had it all figured out. When college applications were done, then that became when my first short film was written, then that became when Incognito was shot, and the goalposts kept moving back and back and back. And so one day, when a friend said, I got the call from my mom that it seemed his time was near. So I apologized to my friend and left. I didn't care how fast I was going for those 5 hours. All that mattered to me was that I had to make it home. While I can assure you that Happy and I spent a wonderful last week together, that's really not the point. At the time of this video, I am 25 years old, and if I magically live to 100, that means a quarter of my time has passed me by. Seeing these videos and photos, I cried, wondering what happened to this time I falsely assumed I had on my side. I live believing that if I worked hard enough, smart enough, quickly enough, I could finally enjoy life after I had earned it. When in reality, the films I made, whether I finished them well or not, the people I love, the very matters that I feel define me, their stories will continue, with or without me, just the same. It's human nature to start things, but it takes maturity to see them through. And I believe it's better to create at all than not. So, if you've spent countless nights lying awake, doubting yourself, I hope this video, and my voice, may be exactly the push you need to begin, and most importantly, to finish. But then again, that's just like my opinion, man. You made this far! My team and I really appreciate any support we're given, whether it's by clicking subscribe, sharing the video, or letting us know if you like or dislike the content. Stay tuned for more videos, and I'll catch you later.